let's talk about the designer and engineer relationship and how it can be one of the best parts of working as a product designer, particularly when working as a design team of one. Before we get into it, I just want to briefly talk about how over the years I've heard many opinions around the designer and developer dynamic and how the designers are sometimes frustrated that their solutions aren't built to pixel perfection and that the product doesn't always look and feel and behave the way it should. So I really believe that is a problem that can be solved very easily. And there are 3 areas we're going to talk about today that should help you in that if you've ever faced that situation or feel in that way. The first thing we're going to talk about is something that when I understood myself really unlocked a new level of collaboration and appreciation for everybody on the team. And that is understanding that everybody on the product team wants to create the best solution possible. We just have different skill sets and we come into the process at different times. So if we think about how we would operate as a product designer, we would spend time researching and understanding the business needs and the problems that users are facing, and we would use that to conduct research and then ultimately come to solutions that we can test that we believe solve that problem and ultimately get to a position where the solution we provide does solve that problem for the user and equally addresses the goals of the business. So we do that through different techniques, ultimately through a design process that we can repeat. Now, if we think about some of the things that an engineer might be concerned with, so a lot of the time that might come down to the performance of the application. So we're thinking about speed, loading times, how that's impacted by the level of content coming through to the front end, how components can be built in a way that are reusable, so saving time and reducing unnecessary code. And if we actually boil down to the reasons for doing that, a lot of the time there's a lot of overlap in terms of the benefits that brings to the user. So if we look at those examples and think, well, loading times actually do have a huge impact on the experience that a user receives. And that's definitely something that we should be considering as designers, and is a great opportunity there to collaborate a lot more with our engineering counterparts and understand how we can actually help to reduce things like that in the way that we design. And reusable components makes a lot of sense as well from a design point of view, because we want that experience to feel consistent and for users to get familiar with the product experience, the interface, how things work, and just have a good expectation that the product is going to behave in a way that they expect it to. So with just those few examples, we can already start to see that actually there's a lot of crossover in terms of what the different roles are trying to achieve, and even on a specific level, there are good opportunities there to actually just start a discussion and a collaboration during the design and engineering process, where you can start to really understand and really empathize with the things that engineers care about, and vice versa as well. So as long as you can show that there's a lot of crossover in terms of the things that you care about, that's really going to start to build that relationship from both sides. So a great way you can start to do this is to focus on a design system. Now, I will caveat this heavily to say a design system is not always required. It completely depends on the size of the product, the team, the business. There's got to be a lot of benefits if you do that, but sometimes it can be overkill. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a design system, but just some way of collaborating on starting to build out the components of a product. And what that tends to lead to is you'll start to get into the specifics of things like spacing values, naming conventions, how you can actually eliminate components in favor of having a more consistent experience. So all of this stuff really does overlap both design and engineering. And to be honest, I do think that the term design system is often quite misleading because yes, as a designer, you can be the one to actually kind of make sure it's always up to date and is reflecting the best experience possible for the end user. But equally, the design system has to be built and created in a way that can be used by the front end into actual code and components that can be used to build up the product experience. So whether that's a web project, whether it's a native app, mobile, Android, iOS, Mac, whatever it is, there needs to be that collaboration there between design and engineering to ensure that the design system is built, maintained, and actually uses conventions that you've agreed upon together in order for that to be successful. And what that also unlocks is you can start to build up like a shared understanding of terminology. So let's say you want to kind of work on a card component. Maybe previously you'd have to say, oh, well, there's this grid item with an image, text, and a CTA, and it repeats. So we want to tweak the values here to make it a little bit more visually appealing and accessible. Now, you could eliminate a lot of that by just saying the primary card component, we're going to work on that, and we can update the CTA. So even just by having these terms that you can kind of agree on and then use in a consistent way, over time, it's going to save so much in terms of headaches and trying to explain yourself, and just it will get you on the same page when it comes to talking about how the product experience is built. And going back to the initial example and scenario that I gave around making sure that the designers and developers are working in a way that means that there's no kind of hostility and there's kind of no negative feelings around how things are built. If you can start to agree on these things in terms of conventions and terminology, that is going to mean that when you're actually building out a solution, you can be very specific about the things you talk about and make sure that everybody understands why certain pixel values are used, why certain design decisions have been made, because you're actually building up a system of those components and those key elements together. So it really helps to make sure that what you design is actually gone through and built in a way that is as expected. But equally, it also brings from the other side a technical feasibility answer to, can this actually be built in a way that's feasible from a tech point of view as well as from an experience point of view. So sometimes there might be compromises. I will always say that if there's a toss-up, it should always come down to the most optimal user experience, and that you should try and work the tech in a way that supports that. But of course, there's going to be times where you need to be, you need to be realistic. Sometimes things just maybe aren't quite possible right now with the tech that you have. So having that conversation as early as possible with someone from the engineering team is really going to help you to kind of scale out that solution in a way that makes sense from both a UX and a tech perspective. The second thing we're going to talk about is how the handoff process looks. So what we just spoke about there in terms of that early collaboration, that naturally leads into a progression of the handover or handoff process that is ubiquitous with that misinterpretation that design and developers are at odds with each other, and when the design is finished, it gets thrown over the fence, and fingers crossed that it gets built in the way that was intended. The handover process itself, I believe it just shouldn't be a thing, because you've collaborated in such an effective way up to this point. It should just be a natural progression that once a solution is agreed upon and the designs are in place, you have the design system components there ready, it just naturally moves into the build process. And you can start to kind of prototype things earlier on with engineers, and that's going to it's going to alleviate the need for a big bang handover. Here's all the files, here's all the values, let's go and build it. Because you've already built up that foundation across design and engineering, and you've got a shared appreciation for the solution, and equally everyone's had their own input at this point, and you've agreed, you've collaborated, you've maybe even hopefully not compromised too much, but there could be areas where you've had to kind of maybe de-scope certain things for now and then focus on the longer term experience. But whatever that looks like, that effectively becomes the handover process, because you've collaborated so well up to this point that there shouldn't be a need for just passing off a design file for build. And the third area that is really fundamental to having a good working relationship between design and engineering is building team spirit. And that can come in many ways. And if you've gone through the first two, you're ultimately going to end up in a position where you do have a great relationship between design and engineering. You're speaking daily, you're potentially even working in an agile process together, in a workflow that actually has daily involvements, multiple touch points, and you're always having conversations about how to push the product forward. And by virtue of that, that naturally evolves into a great team spirit where you win together and you learn together. And on a more practical level, some of the things you can start to do as a designer is just bring people into the process. And as we talked about, as soon as possible is always the key. But you can go even further by inviting the engineering team along to usability testing sessions so they can see firsthand how users do actually, in reality, how they use the product and their reactions, their behaviors. And not only does that give them insight into actually how people are using the product in real life and day to day, but it does build that level of trust that you can kind of bring them into this process. You can kind of build more credibility as a designer to show them the things that you do and how it's not just for the design team, it's for everyone. It's for the product team, it's for the company, that everyone benefits from seeing this kind of thing, getting these insights. So just sharing as much as possible when it comes to research findings, any insights that you get from the users, from stakeholders, but equally from kind of, just talking about different design approaches and making that visible, and it's just all part of that team spirit. So hopefully you can come away from this with a new appreciation for that design and engineer relationship. And any misconceptions that you might have had in the past or negative experiences, you can use these 3 techniques to address those and just be the one to start building those relationships. We all want to build a great product. So why don't we use our skills, lean into them, learn from others, and just help everyone come together and just build a great experience. If you found this valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.